in English.
Speak here. Yes. So good afternoon, everyone. So let's start. So distinguished guests and participants, thank you very much for joining today's event entitled Implementing the Paris Agreement in Developing Countries, a dialogue with Dr. Yannick Glemarec. This event is organized by Green Climate Fund, GCF, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan, UN Development Program, and UN University Institute for the Advanced Study of Sustainability. My name is Akio Takemoto, Program Head of UNU-IAS. Before we start, I'd like to make some logistical announcements. For audience, please wear the mask in the meeting room as well as in this building. Food and drink are not available in the meeting room except for water and tea. They are allowed to have in the lounge behind the meeting room. For today's event, simultaneous interpretations are available through the headset. And the event will be video recorded and will be made available on the UNU-IAS website later. So now I'd like to start the session by giving the floor to His Excellency, Dr. David Malone, Rector of UNU, for welcoming remarks. Dr. Malone, the floor is yours.
There we are. Thank you very much. Welcome to this building. You're amongst the first people to be in this room since it was structurally reinforced and somewhat renovated over the period of the past 2 years. And we're very grateful to the government of Japan for the work it does to not just keep up the building, but to keep improving the building. My first remark is about the terrible attack on Mr. Abe earlier today. Our anxieties are shared with Japanese colleagues in UNU and more broadly amongst our guests, and we are hoping for the very best outcome possible. Still no news, really, when I came down here not long ago. It's a great pleasure to have a seminar around the theme of implementation of the Paris Agreement in developing countries, because UNU in Tokyo has been very much focused on climate change. Generally, the science of sustainability is the topic of our research institute and of our teaching programs here in Tokyo. So we're delighted to have Yannick Glemarec with us again. He's a former resident of Japan and has 2 half-Japanese children. So he's thoroughly at home, and he knows the building probably better than I do. It's obvious that we're facing big challenges on climate change. 2 things have happened that have thrown the international community off track very fundamentally in the climate, in its climate strategy. One has been a still unexplained but generalized slowdown of economic growth starting in about 2015. We had very high economic growth, particularly in the developing world, between the year 2000 and the year 2015, and then much slower growth for reasons we still don't fully understand. But that has been compounded and further disrupted by the pandemic, as you all know. And both of these developments have been very damaging to the fight against climate change because, first off, the countries most affected, developing countries, are least able to protect themselves and have less money to do so today. And while official development assistance has kept rising statistically, the reality is that many developing countries are at much greater risk today than they were when the Paris Accord was agreed. So this is a fundamental challenge that the Climate Fund on its own cannot address. The Climate Fund is a very important part of a wider strategy to combat climate change, which above all relies on nation states. And nation states have been thoroughly discombobulated for a while now, and we've seen climate change, which was probably going into the pandemic the highest priority of governments, medium and long-term priority of governments, has slid from that highest place. So I'm delighted that this event is an opportunity to reflect on the challenge that Yannick and his colleagues in the Climate Fund are here to help address. I'm delighted he could be amongst us, and I'm delighted that the Japanese government has been so supportive of the Climate Fund, and I'm sure will continue to be. I'll stop there in the interests of time, but I did want to welcome you to UNU and say how delighted we are that you're amongst our very first post-pandemic guests in the room. At least we hope it's a post-pandemic period. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rector. So the next, I'd like to invite His Excellency Mr. Takeshi Akahori, Director General and Ambassador for Global Issues, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan, to provide opening remarks. Ambassador Akahori, the floor is yours. Please come to this podium. Thank you.
ご紹介に預かりました外務省地球規模課題審議官の赤堀でございます。本日、グレマレック GCF 事務局長をお迎えし、開発途上国におけるパリ協定の実施について意見交換の機会を得られることを大変歓迎いたします。国連大学マローン学長様、国連開発計画近藤駐日代表様、国連大学サステナビリティ高等研究所ディレクター山口様、皆様はじめ関係者の皆様のご尽力に感謝いたします。気候変動の影響は生活の中でも感じられるようになってきております。例えば先月末も日本全国が猛暑に襲われ、東京では最高気温が摂氏35度以上の猛暑日を9日連続で記録いたしました。この記録は1875年の統計開始以来最長だということでございます。世界においても気候変動の影響は深刻さを増しております。IPCC はパリ協定に記された気温上昇に関する目標達成のためには、各国による取り組みのさらなる強化が必要であると警告しております。気候変動は途上国も含め世界全体で真剣に取り組むべき喫緊の課題となっております。昨年11月の COP26 は3年ぶりの COP でございました。気候変動対策に関するルール形成が具体的前進を見せるなど多くの成果が上がりました。途上国に対する資金支援、野心的な合意文書採択、パリ協定運用指針完成等において日本政府は積極的に貢献いたしました。岸田総理、山口環境大臣も出席し、各国代表から高い評価を得ました。私自身も首席交渉官を務めましたけれども、他の国の代表の方々から日本に高い評価をいただきました。 岸田内閣は気候変動問題を新しい資本主義の実現によって克服すべき最大の課題と位置づけております。具体的には2050年カーボンニュートラル、2030年温室効果ガス 46% 削減、排出削減目標の達成に向けた努力、また COP26 で岸田総理はコーンウォールサミットで、菅前総理が表明した官民合わせて600億ドル規模の表明済みの支援に最大100億ドルの支援を追加すること、また適用資金を倍増することを表明しました。日本の排出削減目標も追加支援も COP26 の成功に大きく貢献したと考えております。現在、COP26 で一致した内容を含め、パリ協定の目標達成のために各国は気候変動対策を着実に実施すべき段階に来ております。そして、途上国において気候変動対策を実施する上で、緑の気候基金 GCF の果たす役割は一層大きくなっております。GCF は低炭素排出及び気候に強靭な開発経路に向けたパラダイムシフトの促進をスローガンとして掲げています。若く将来性豊かな国際機関であり、UNDP などのパートナー機関と数多くの事業を途上国にて実施しています。GCF による事業は196件、承認総額はすでに100億ドルを超え、その対象国も128カ国に広がっております。先進国による資金貢献の規模も200億ドルを超えています。我が国もこれまで30億ドルの拠出を表明しております。新型コロナパンデミックで事業が大きく制限されるという困難な状況の中で、事業継続に努められたグレマレック事務局長と職員の方々の熱意と努力に敬意を表したいと思います。我が国は主要なドナー国として GCF のより良い運営に貢献しております。本日はグレマレック事務局長から開発途上国におけるパリ協定の実施に関して貴重なお話を伺えるのを楽しみにしております。ご清聴ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much, Ambassador. So the next, I'd like to invite today's main guest, His Excellency Dr. Yannick Glemarec, to provide a 15 minutes presentation. So before giving him a floor, I'd like to introduce his biography. Dr. Glemarec is Executive Director of the Green Climate Fund since 2019. He has 30 years of international experience in climate change, development, and finance. From 2015 to 18, he served as Assistant Secretary General and Deputy Executive Director for Policy and Program at UN Women. Previously in New York, he was the Executive Coordinator of the UN Multi-Partner Trust Fund Office and served as the UNDP Deputy Executive Coordinator and Executive Coordinator for the Global Environmental Facility for more than 10 years. He holds a PhD from the University of Paris in Environmental Sciences, 2 master's degrees in hydrology and business administration. Dr. Glemarec, the floor is yours.
Thanks. Your Excellencies, dear participants, at the onset, I would like to echo the words of Dr. Malone and wish for the best possible outcome for Mr. Abe. I would like also to deeply thank the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan, as well as UNU and the UNDP for giving to GCF this opportunity to present our work on how to create green market to catalyze finance at scale to address climate change. It's also a pleasure, personally, to be back to UNU. The last time I was given a chance to make a few remarks was at the invitation of my friend Katsuo Takamoto, and I think it was in Yokohama, I believe. And I believe it was on climate sciences, why I'm to focus more on climate finance today. Before diving on GCF, I would like maybe to spend a few minutes on the overall landscape of climate finance. during the ice ages that have seen the emergence of our species, Homo sapiens, and all its antecessors, what is called the Pleistocene, that started a little bit more than 2.5 million years ago and ended up 11,700 years ago. During the ice ages, the average global temperature has oscillated from -6 degrees during a glacial period to +2 degrees Celsius during interglacial. -6 to +2, -6 to +2, -6 to +2, -6 to +2. And the last time we have come close to +2 degrees Celsius was 130,000 years ago during the last interglacial called the Eemian. And there, the level of the sea was 7 to 12 meters above what it is today. So just think about what it means for the physical geography of Tokyo and of the entire world. So it's not surprising that one of the key goals of the Paris Agreement was to make sure that we will not cross the 2 degrees Celsius threshold and try our utmost not to cross the 1.5 degree Celsius threshold. Where do we stand? Right now, we believe that we have a 50% chance to cross at least once the 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold within the next 5 years, at least once within the next 5 years. When the Paris Agreement was approved in 2015, the probability was 0. At the speed we are going, we might cross the 2 degrees Celsius threshold between 2045 and 2060. That means we will basically enter a period that we have not seen since the Pliocene. And the consequences, the implication will be unthinkable. And so what are we doing? Close to 30 years of efforts to abate greenhouse gas emission are now having a first impact, but far too slow. If you look at the emission gap between 2019 and the emission gap now, at least there is one good thing. We are not growing anymore. 54%, I think, of the emission are since 1990. But we are not slowing down fast enough. For us to remain within 1.5 degrees Celsius, we will have to cut our emission by 43% by 2030 and reach net zero emission by 2050. And we are definitely not on a trajectory for a net zero emission climate resilient society by 2050. It's better than it was a few years ago. Last time I made the presentation on climate sciences, Katsuo, we were on a trajectory for 4 to 6 degrees Celsius, something we had actually not seen since the extinction of the dinosaurs. But we are basically moving right now toward close to 2.7, 3 degrees Celsius. And so why, if we know what is about to happen, why are we not acting? What are the main barriers? And not surprisingly, one of the main barriers is money. We believe that in order to be able to finance all the net zero climate resilient infrastructure that we need to support the economic aspiration of people and at the same time avoid catastrophic climate change, we will need about $3 trillion a year by 2030 and $6 trillion a year by 2050. And last year we were at $630 million. So that means a fifth of where we should be by 2030, a tenth of where we should be by 2050. And one of the most concerning things with that graph is the fact that we seem to be plateauing. Actually, the level of growth in climate finance has been slowing down over between the 2019 2020 compared to the previous period. And this was before COVID-19. And it was before the war in Ukraine. So I have no idea what will be the number that we will have next year. So we have a major issue. And when I started my career, we could have basically avoided catastrophic climate change simply by reducing greenhouse gas emissions. That was a long time ago. today, basically, we are already condemned to a lot of climate pain, a lot of climate damage. And therefore, we need to adapt. We need to adapt very, very fast. The low, poor mitigation translate into very high adaptation needs. Poor adaptation response translate into dramatic losses and damages. It's, at the end of the day, there is no lunch. We will pay one way or another one. And so why are we facing this climate finance gap? It's not by lack of money. There are right now tens of trillions of dollars that are basically earning negative real interest rate. And, but tens and tens, actually. So we have planned, and if you invest in infrastructure, for example, a renewable energy technology project, normally you can expect a real interest rate of, a real return on your investment of 4 to 5 to 6%. So you will expect basically smart investors to do what they do, to be looking for higher yield. And so why isn't it happening? First, because we are creatures of habits. And in a low financing cost environment like Japan, where you can get money for 3 or 4%, one of the problems is that green projects are being perceived as demanding more upfront capital and therefore being more risky, and using different new technologies, new practices, and therefore being more risky. So, and at the end, not having a higher return. So that's basically the current perception, your green project, and your red project is basically your carbon-intensive project, what we know how to do, what we have been doing for decades. And we need to shift this perception toward the left quadrant, where when you incorporate climate, physical, and transition risk into the equation, you have much, much, much better to invest in a green project. And for example, the GCF has been conducting quite a lot of work to assess what will be the internal rate of return of investment into climate-resilient infrastructure versus investment into traditional infrastructure. And under any kind of plausible climate future, your internal rate of return is higher when you invest in climate-resilient infrastructure, even if the upfront cost is a little bit higher. And so that's where we have to go. What does it mean? It means that we have basically to retrain every single professional on Earth. That means we have to retrain all the engineers like me. When I was never trained about how to incorporate climate, physical, and transition risk in my engineering design. We have to retrain every single financial analyst. We have to retrain everybody. And we have to make sure that the next generation does not need to be retrained, because the next generation is properly trained to design, for example, infrastructure in a changing climate. So it's a gigantic effort in terms of knowledge building, in terms of skill development. But this is in Japan. Now, let's imagine that this is a wind power project in Japan, and the investors have been able to get money for 4%, and therefore it's fairly profitable. Now, you take the same project, same technology, same engineers. You bring the Japanese engineers, but you do it in Fiji, and which is a B+ country in terms of credit rating. That means hardly investment grade. And there, you're in a completely different situation. The cost of money is not 3 or 4%, it's 18 to 22%. And so suddenly, the same project is absolutely not profitable. The upfront cost makes it extremely expensive. And that's basically, and you still have the risk of, because the cost of money is so high that if you have any kind of delay in the commissioning of your project, bam, you have a risk of bankruptcy. the risk of liquidity trap is huge. And so that's basically the situation that we are facing on the left side, where because of the high cost of money, the higher upfront capital cost of a green project will result into a lower return and a higher risk of liquidity crisis and bankruptcy. And so if you're an investor, you go for the red. And so what we have to do is to move to the right. We need to de-risk. While in Japan, we simply needed to reprice green asset. Here, we need not only to reprice, but we need to de-risk. And so we can de-risk it, for example, by providing a guarantee, where we guarantee the entire loans, and so there we can get maybe a loan at 6%. There are 4,000 different instruments that have been developed for policy de-risking, financial de-risking. And that's the business of the Green Climate Fund, helping in not only repricing assets, but de-risking green assets in developing countries. I had forewarned you that I will be a little bit more wonkish than I am normally when I don't speak to an academic institution. So a few words on the Green Climate Fund. We were basically set up in 2011 as one of the financing mechanisms of the Climate Change Convention. We were capitalized at the end of 2014, beginning of 2015. As already mentioned by Mr. Akaori, our mandate is to foster a paradigm shift toward low-emission, climate-resilient development pathways in developing countries, in a sense, to basically accelerate low-carbon, climate-resilient investment in developing countries. And when we were established, it was decided not to create a new agency, not to create a new bank, but to create basically an institution, an international finance institution that will work with the existing institution, the existing banks, public or commercial banks, that will work with the existing UN agencies, that will work with the existing private equity fund, civil society organization. And therefore, our business model is to basically help all the financing and technical institutions in the world to basically shift their portfolio from a high carbon to a low carbon content by often helping them to mainstream climate into their investment decision making and co-invest with them, take part of the risk of the first investment for them. So right now we are working with more than 200 public and private institutions, from some of the largest commercial banks in the world, such as Mitsubishi Bank. And my colleague Henry, who is the Deputy Executive Director, and Kavita, who is the head of our private sector division, were with me for a meeting with MUFG to discuss some of the projects that we could submit to our next board. But we are also working with, for example, Australia Save the Children for projects at the community level. And so and we try to basically bring everybody together in the fight against climate change. Now, we are a fairly bizarre public institution because the part of our mandate is actually to take risk. And Turu, who is on our board, can tell you how very uncommon it is for a public institution to have as the mandate to be patient risk capital. So the level of risk that we take is basically at the level of risk of impact investors. And so, as you will see in one of my examples, we can, for example, provide first loss equity, first loss guarantee. Our projects can be fairly large. We have projects which are well north of $1 billion, and we have one north of 10 billion currently. That's where GCF stands within the climate change architecture, and we try to bring everybody else on board. Now, let's discuss a little bit about our change. Some of you might not be very familiar with the terminology paradigm shift. First time I read it, it brought me back to 12th grade memories of my course in philosophy. But basically, it's a transformative change. You try to find a pressure point and basculate the entire system. And so how do we effect a transformative change? The most powerful way to effect transformative change is to create a new market or to transform a market. So our business is to create green markets. How do we do it? In order to create green markets, we are adopting a four-pronged approach. The first thing is that with grant money, we help in creating an enabling environment for climate change action. And that can be developing long-term climate strategies, that can be creating new climate institutions, that can be helping governments to translate their existing strategies into a portfolio of bankable projects. It's up to the countries to decide. We do not decide. And so we can allocate $1 million a year per country in grant for them to decide what they need in order to be able to scale up their action. And so once we have an enabling environment for climate action, the second point is to enable new ideas, new solutions to come. Between 50 to 70% of the technological solutions that we need for mitigation and adaptation have yet to be developed. So we need climate entrepreneurs. And there what we can do is that we can support incubators and accelerators, but we can also provide early growth finance. The third thing, once you have a new idea, is that how do you bring it to commercial scale? And there we can de-risk a project. We can come with this first lost equity to de-risk a project. And once we have a commercial solution that has been demonstrated at scale, you have a track record, a commercial track record. And this is extremely important because bankers cannot deal with uncertainty, but they can deal with risk. They can price risk. And once you have a commercial track record, what you have to do is a fourth pillar, which is to make sure that all the national financial institutions, public or private, can basically appraise this kind of new climate solution and access domestic or capital markets to finance them. So I will give one example of, for each of these four pillars to make it a little bit less theoretical. We have more than 500 grants in terms of readiness, in terms of developing an enabling environment for climate action. So one example close to Japan is in Cambodia, where the government basically has decided that to create a new financial institution. Most likely they will create a green bank. We have help in developing a green bank, for example, in Mongolia. And a green bank is an institution that has a dedicated expertise to identify and finance green projects and can be extremely profitable when you look at the experience of the US and British green banks. So that was the decision of Cambodia, but other countries use these resources to develop climate strategies, net zero, climate resilient strategies by 2050, for example. Others use it to develop the pipeline of bankable projects. The second prong, supporting climate innovators. There, if you are a climate innovator in Japan, it's already not easy to get some equity to start your project. But most likely, you must have a rich aunt or uncle that can give a bit of money, and you might be able to convince your bank to give you a little bit of money, and you have a venture capital industry. So you might be able to get some early growth to come with the minimum viable product for your ID. In a developing country, good luck. It will be extremely difficult to get access to any kind of early growth finance. And so the Green Climate Fund has developed a number of specialty financing mechanisms to provide early growth finance to entrepreneurs. And so, for example, this one is a $400 million private equity fund for supporting innovation in adaptation. And that one, you know, when you tell people, I would like to have some money to invest in startup working in adaptation in developing countries, well, your value proposition is a bit rocky for most investors. And so what we did is that we provided $100 million of private equity and as first lost equity. the first to lose its money if something goes wrong is the Green Climate Fund. If it's go right, we are creating new product, new classes of assets, and so we can after mobilize gigantic amount of money for climate change. The third prong, one example, is you have your minimum viable product, you have your new climate solution. How do you bring it from a concept to a commercial application? And there you often need to basically de-risk the first project, as I mentioned. And so here are two examples of projects that are being implemented by some of our Japanese partners. We have 3 Japanese accredited entities among the 200, and Mitsubishi Bank, Sumitomo Bank, and JICA. And so the Arboro project is a project implemented by Mitsubishi Bank. And this one is about sustainable plantation, sustainable wood forest plantation that's maximize development co-benefits and respect every single environmental and social safeguard needed to make sure that this benefit local population does not exploit them. And and for that one, we basically provided $25 million of equity as an anchor investor, the first to put our money on the table so that other people will come. And with the good name of Mitsubishi Bank and our anchor investment, that was enough for the rest of the fund to be capitalized. I would say another project in adaptation is, for example, in the Maldives, and this one is with JICA. And so this one is about sea level rise, coastal zone protection, and it's a new engineering approach. And if there is one thing people do not like, is new engineering approaches. And therefore, there the idea was to provide some assistance for these new approaches to see the light of the day. So if we have 200 projects, I don't have the time to go through more examples, but I will, if you are interested in the concept of blended finance, public-private money to de-risk project, please do not hesitate to go to our website. And the fourth and the last prong, you have a commercially proven solution, be it an engineering solution or a new type of business practices. And thereafter, how do you help domestic financial institutions to basically adopt this new approach? As I mentioned, if you are in a country that is B+, it's very difficult to access capital market. And so this one, again with Mitsubishi Bank, we are working on a green guarantee company. And this green guarantee company, we hope, will be rated BBB+. And it means that if we go back to this wind project in Japan, that we have tried to transpose to Fiji, same technology, same engineers. And it was not bankable. There, this green guarantee company will provide 100% guarantee to the green bonds for financing this project. And because we provide 100% guarantee, it's our credit rating, BBB+, not the sovereign credit rating B+, that is taken into consideration. And here the cost of money should be around 6%. And so that is one of the different type of initiatives we developed in order to enable domestic financial institutions to mainstream climate, physical, and transition risk into every single investment decision making and access capital to finance them. Capital at an affordable cost. For those who would like to know a little bit more about us, I will suggest that you help yourself with our annual result report there at the end of the table that provide many examples about our type of activities. Many thanks for your attention.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Glemarec, for your excellent presentations. So now let's move on to the panel discussion. I'd like to introduce panelists. They are all in front of the screen. Dr. Glemarec, Mr. Akahori, and Mr. Tetsuo Kondo, Director of UNDP Representation Office in Tokyo. and Professor Shinobu Yamaguchi, Director of UNU-IAS. In the first round, I'd like to invite three panelists, Mr. Akahori, Mr. Kondo, and Dr. Yamaguchi, to provide a short presentation for 5 minutes here at the podium. So first, I'd like to give the floor to Ambassador Akahori. Please. Thank you.
I'll start in English and continue in Japanese. I'd like to first thank Dr. Glemarec for the eloquent explanation of the risks we are facing based on scientific fact and of the need for financing. I myself live in a city called Yokohama near Tokyo, and since Dr. Glemarec knows Japan very well, it is very low. So the building where I live is at 4.5 meters above sea level. And you mentioned the sea rise, and I don't know the English, you mentioned the English name for that period, but was it Holocene Glacial Retreat? In Japan, we call that the Jomon Sea Rise, Jomon Kaishin. And I took my daughter to a museum recently of the history of Yokohama, and the place where I live is under the sea. So I know what we're talking about, and thank you for reminding us of that. Here I turn to Japanese. 気候変動は途上国も含め世界全体で真剣に取り組むべき喫緊の課題と申し上げましたけれども、パリ協定ではすべての国が気候変動対策に取り組むことを規定するということが約束されております。パリ協定の成立に先立ち、2010年のメキシコ・カンクンで開かれた COP16 において、先進国全体で途上国に対して官民合わせて年1000億ドルの気候資金をこれを2020年までに動員する目標を設定しました。この国際公約はパリ協定が採択された COP21 において2025年まで継続することが決定されました。これはいわば国際公約先進国としての義務でございますが、我が国はこの地球規模課題の解決に向けて先進国も途上国も共に取り組まなければならないという思いで率先して取り組んできております。これまで毎年円で言いますと 1.3 兆円規模の途上国支援を継続して実施してきております。先ほど申し上げましたとおり、コーンウォールでは5年間でさらに600億ドルの支援を表明し、そして COP26 ではそれに加えて2025年までの5年間で官民合わせて約100億ドルの追加支援を表明しました。このコミットメントは平均とか合計とかはないんですけれども、それでもあえて平均いたしますと、もともと日本は先進国全体の1000億ドルの 12% をいわば約束していたわけですが、岸田総理の表明によりこれが 14% に増大いたしまして、またさらに今も事務局長のお話の中に適用の話がありましたけれども、アダプテーション、これに対する支援をですね、2025年までの5年間で計148億ドルにするということを総理は表明しました。これはまさに COP などの場で途上国から適用分野での資金を増やしてほしいという要求がありましたので、そういったニーズの高まりに応えたものです。我が国が率先して適用資金の倍増を表明したり、合計額を積み増したことによって、グラスゴー合意が大きく前進したわけですけれども、決定の中の一つが、先進国全体で2025年までに2019年比で適用資金を倍増すると、日本が率先して表明したことをみんなで約束したという成果がございました。我が国は JICA を通じた二国間支援を実施しておりますが、東南アジアやアフリカにおいて ODA を活用したプロジェクトを実施しております。特に海岸線保全などの防災プロジェクトは、かねてから実施してきておりますけれども、気候変動由来による海面上昇を防ぐ観点から、適用支援として受け入れ国から高い評価を得ております。また、エネルギー分野を中心に、JICA の海外投融資や JBIC の融資を活用した民間投資促進型プロジェクトも多く実施しておりまして、気候変動の緩和策に 大きく貢献します。緩和っていうのは排出削減ということでございます。また GCF は UNDP といった国際機関を通じた多国間での気候支援も精力的に実施しております。これらの支援は ODA 供与上の制約を受けず、すべての開発途上国に支援を提供することが可能だというメリットがあります。こういった面で多国間支援は2国間支援を補完する位置づけであると考えております。日本は GCF への世界第2位の拠出国でございますけれども、まさに GCF は2国間 ODA では支援が難しい中所得国や島諸国への支援が可能になります。先ほどグレマレック事務局長も言及されましたモルディブの海岸保全防護対策促進事業、これ日本としても非常に典型例として重視しております。GCF はエクイティやギャランティーを活用した柔軟な民間投資プロジェクトも実施してきておりまして、これも先ほど事務局長から言及ありましたが、三菱 UFJ 銀行は GCF の資金でアフリカ、南米の森林保全を目的としたファンドに出資するプロジェクトを実施中です。この森林プロジェクトは緩和にも適応にも貢献する横断型クロスカッティングなプロジェクトでありまして、日本もこのクロスカッティングな分野というものを大変注目しております。UNDP も日本政府にとって重要なパートナーであります。後ほど近藤駐日代表からお話ございますJapan UNDP Support for Transitional Effort to Decarbonization JUSTED、これに総額4200万ドルの気候支援を決定しており、パートナーとして実施していただいております。アジア、中東欧、アフリカの23カ国の NDC 実施を支援しております。また、適応支援倍増の一環として、本年3月には、日本政府は適応基金に約600万ドルを拠出しております。人材育成の重要性について、これもグレマレック事務局長からお話ありましたけれども、まさに私自身もですね、新たな研修を受け直さなければならないなということで、今日もその研修の一環だと思っておりますけれども、人材育成、日本政府としても大変重視しております。気候変動支援の展開と並行して、気候変動政策やプロジェクトを立案実施できる人材をいかに育成していくか、これは重要な課題でございます。この関連では、国連大学がサステナビリティ高等研究所を要し、気候変動をはじめとするサステナビリティに関する教育研究を行っておられるのは大変重視しておりますし、勇気づけられる取り組みでございます。国内外の気候人材の育成に関する国連大学のさらなる貢献を期待いたします。ご清聴ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much. So the next panelist, I'd like to invite Mr. Kondo to speak. The floor is yours.
Great, thank you very much. Executive Director Yannick, welcome to Japan. I'm very happy to have you here as a UNDP representative in Japan. And then I know that GCF is one of the largest partner for climate change for UNDP. And then since our administrator, Achim Steiner, will be in Tokyo next week. So I, on behalf of himself, to tell you, welcome again. But since the original fund of GCF came from Japanese people and taxpayers, I speak in Japanese today. 皆様、近藤でございます。私たちが、今向き合っているこの世の中の、非常にこの激動する、時代になっておりますけれども、気候変動、また今起きているこのパンデミック、なかなかやみません。またウクライナでの戦争、こういったクライシスを見てお気づきになったことというのは、おそらくこの世界のこの経済、人々の暮らしというのが互いに強く結びつき合っていると。したがってどんな問題も一国のですね、解決策によって、なんとかなるということではないということが、我々 痛いほど最近分かっているわけでございます。同時にこの最新のこの気候変動に関するIPCC のですね、報告書を見ますと、やはりこの先ほどもヤニック事務局長からお話がありましたが、温暖化のこの差し迫った影響、この差し迫っているということに関してですね、注意を払う必要があると思います。パリ協定と SDGs の目標を達成するためには、思い切った気候変動対策が緊急かつ極めて重要であるということを改めて今日は確認させていただきたいと思います。気候変動は2030年までにさらに1億人の人々を貧困に追いやる可能性があります。そのことからも分かりますが、気候変動への取り組みは SDGs の誰一人取り残さないという目標の達成と本質的に深く結びついているわけでございます。11月にはエジプトのシャルムエルシャイクで開催される COP27 に向けてですね、思い切った気候変動対策に向けた世界の取り組みを加速させて、各国が自国において成果を上げる決意があることを示す必要があります。各国のこの経済のこの緊密なこの連関性ということに目を向けますに、先ほどヤニック事務局長がおっしゃいましたこのグリーンマーケットというものをですね、創出して、そこでイノベーションを起こし、資金を動員していくということが一層大事になってくると感じます。パリ協定の目標に貢献するNDC ですね、ナショナリー・デターミンドこのコミットメントですね、としてこの知られるこの国別誓約ですけれども、世界最大の支援である支援を行っておりますのはUNDP でございまして、気候プロミスを通じてですね、私たちは国連システム全体として、各国が NDC をですね、実施して目標を行動に移すために必要な技術、資金、能力開発の支援を行っております。簡単に私のおりますこの UNDP でございますが、ご存知でない方も結構いらっしゃると思いますので申し上げますと、大きく分けて今6つの重点分野で、開発を行っております。サステナブルデベロップメント。この6つの分野というのは、ガバナンスであるとか、環境保全からレジリエンス、防災危機対応、ジェンダー格差、エナジー、こういったことがですね、バラバラに行われて成果が出るというものではないわけです。このでもこの過去にですね、1966年以来 UNDP が培ってきた開発の経験をもとに、この気候変動のですね、ファイナンシングをどう進めていくか、それによってどうやってこの、ミティゲーションをですね、確保していくか、また適用を実現していくかということについて考えながら仕事をしております。過去7年間にわたり、GCF と緊密なパートナーシップを発展させてまいりましたが、その間、UNDP は34カ国、36のプロジェクトを通じて、総額11億6500万ドルの、GCF の資金を使わせていただいて、プロジェクトを行ってまいりました。またこの資金をですね、使うだけではなくて、そのことによって、合計で12億8000万ドルに及ぶ資金をレバレッジできているということもございます。でこのことにGCF 並びにその原資を提供いただいている日本政府、日本国民の皆様に心より感謝を申し上げます。本当にありがとうございます。すみません、はい、そろそろあと1分ですね。はい。でまたこの GCF のプロジェクトを行う上で、今後 UNDP が考えておりますのは、まず第一に NDCs の実施を促進するために、各国の NDC フォーカルポイントと緊密に連携して、その国にオーナーシップを持ってもらうということ。第2に、ブレンデッドファイナンス、混合金融、市場へのアクセス、民間と、公共とのパートナーシップといったことですね。また、財政的持続性と実行可能性の要素を備えた革新的なソリューションを、次世代の UNDP、GCF プロジェクトとプログラムを実現の中に反映させていきたいと思います。また共通のテーマを持つ国の提案を一つのプログラムにまとめて、資金にアクセスしやすいようにするというプログラム方式、またその民間セクター、市民社会、地 地域開発銀行などとですね、協力してですね、国連機関のパートナーシップを拡大していくと。またダイレクトアクセス機関 DAE がですね GCF の資金が活用できるように、応援するということです。一言日本政府がですねUNDP を通じて実施してくださっているこの JASTED プログラム、クライメットプロミスプログラムについて申し上げます。時間超過して申し訳ございません。UNDP の気候変動対策の支援というのはですね、このパリ協定後の気候に関する公約であるこのクライメットプロミスの基盤の上に成り立っています。2021年の日本政府の補正予算や他のドナーパートナーによる支援を受けまして、第2フェーズでは、少なくとも100カ国において、各国が NDC を確実に実現するキャパシティをつけていただくということに協力をしております。このようなですねセルビアですとかですね、またごめんなさい、GCF のプロジェクトですね、またこのジャスティッドのプロジェクトで申しますと、ケニアですとかブータンなどで、行っておりますけれども、各国がですね NDC の目標の達成に向けた支援をですね迅速にスケールアップをしてですね、でクライメットプロミスを確実に果たしていくということを応援するプロジェクトを行っております。どうも時間超過して申し訳ございません。どうもありがとうございました。
Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Kondo, for the great contribution of UNDP to the climate action. So the next panelist, I'd like to invite Professor Yamaguchi. Floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and my sincere appreciation to Dr. Glemarec for his very detailed, informative, and thought-provoking presentation. And my appreciation also goes to all the speakers here today. So we are very much delighted to host this event with partners in the UN system and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan, and we will continue to work together on urgent action needed to overcome the climate action. Now, I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce some of the initiatives the United Nations University is undertaking to advance our implementation of the Paris Agreement. So quickly, the overview of the United Nations University. UNU was established in 1972 as an autonomous organ of the General Assembly of the United Nations. Thanks to the generosity of the Japanese government, our headquarters are located here in Tokyo, and indeed, this is unique among UN organizations. The mission of the UNU is to help resolve the global problems of human survival, development, and welfare through the research and education. And collaboration is at the core of our work. UNU bridges the international academic community with the UN system, and we provide a platform for the dialogue between the global and local levels. United Nations University currently have 13 institutes across the globe, located in 12 different countries in 4 continents. I have an honor of leading one of these institutes as director, the United Nations University Institute for the Advanced Study of the Sustainability, UNU-IAS. Our mission is to help sustainable future for people and our planet through the policy-oriented research, education, and training. And we aim to serve the international community by providing evidence-based the knowledge and solution to inform policy making on priority issues of the United Nations system. In particular, our work is organized around 4 thematic the areas shown here: the governance for the sustainable development, biodiversity and society, the water and resource management, and innovation and education. But more importantly, our strategy is to integrate these expertise across those areas and between academia and policy making in order to effectively mobilize the knowledge for the sustainability. And we are very proud to announce that we have an education program which plays an important role. And UNU-IAS is the only UNU institute that offered standalone master's and doctoral degrees. We currently have 38 the students equally balanced between master's and doctoral program, and with a 50-50 gender balance. 2/3 of the students are from the developing countries, supported by the range of different scholarships. The unique feature of our education program is their close integration with the research activities. Our students directly contribute to the UNU-IAS research, including in the field, and have valuable opportunities to participate in the major international conferences, including COP26 and upcoming COP27 and COP15. The programs are implemented through a strong partnership with the university in Japan, which provide our students with across over 120 different courses. So the student can obtain a double degree or the joint diploma from this partnership. One last slide. We are very pleased to highlight an exciting new initiatives. The UNU-IAS is developing a new post-degree specialization on the Paris Agreement. This will be the first of its kind to be offered by the UN organization. We announced these initiatives at the COP26 in Glasgow last November, and we'll be inviting applications from the end of this year. The program will then launch in September 2023. And the objectives of this objectives is to develop the future leaders who will be at the forefront of the implementation effort in government, private sector, and other fields. The course will be open to candidates from all the member states, with priority given to those from the developing countries. Okay, just quickly, some of the advantages of this Paris Agreement specialization, I have identified 3. It is a specialization for the future leaders, and we promote the synergies between different fields of expertise so that they can develop the problem-solving skills, okay, with the integrated approach, and the networks. Okay, and we are excited to share the progress of these new initiatives and look forward to strengthening our collaboration with partners to advance its future development. Thank you very much, everyone. I look forward to the further discussion in the next phase of the program. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Yamaguchi. So let me go to the second round. So yes, sorry. Yeah, could you show the 3 key questions? Sorry. Yes, I prepare 3 questions. I'll read. Yes, here. The first question is, what are challenges and opportunities for implementing the Paris Agreement in developing countries? The question 2 is, what are gaps and needs on the capacity, for example, for practitioners, youth, to implement climate actions? What is the role of capacity building and education to close the gaps? Question 3 is, what is the Japanese context for its climate assistance and development of human resources that will lead the climate actions at the global level? So first, I'd like to give a floor to Dr. Glemarec to respond to these questions from your seat. You can speak, and you can select questions among them but you can also answer to all questions. And also, we'll be happy that you can provide views to the presentation by other panelists. So Dr. Glemarec, the floor is yours. Thank you. Yes. Yes, please. It doesn't work? Please assist.
Does it work?
No.
No, it's okay. It's okay. The light is on now. My apologies. Maybe I will focus on question 1. We went to COP26 last year in November with 3 main gaps. And one of the main risks of COP26 was to leave COP26 with 4 main gaps. The first gap was a mitigation gap. We are definitely not on a trajectory toward net zero emission by 2050. And as I mentioned, we are not on a trajectory to stay below 2 degrees Celsius. We're on a trajectory for almost 3 degrees Celsius. The COP26 for me was a gigantic success in the sense that there was a recognition that we had an ambition gap in terms of emission reduction. There was a recognition that we had to do something about it. A very large number of countries, more than 140 now, have taken targets in terms of zero emission reduction by 2050. And when you take these pledges, we are very, very close to 2 degrees Celsius, and even according to some calculation, we might be below 2 degrees Celsius. So while we had a gap before COP26, and we did not know how to address it, after COP26, what we know is that we need to make sure that we implement the 140 plus net zero emission targets by 2050. The second gap that we had was an adaptation gap. As I mentioned during my presentation, when I started my career, it was all about mitigation. This time is over. We have to be as ambitious in terms of mitigation, in terms of adaptation than mitigation. And for example, the GCF board has mandated GCF to allocate 50% of its resources to adaptation, 50% to mitigation. And for adaptation, to allocate at least half of our adaptation resources to the most vulnerable countries, African states, SEEDs, and LDCs. However, and we are almost there. We are at 49-51. But when you look overall, it's only about $20 billion a year that comes in the form of assistance to developing countries for adaptation. And when you look at out of the $80 billion under the UNFCCC, 20 are for adaptation. And when you look at the total financing flow, the one I've used, 632 billion, it's only 46 for adaptation, 7% of the total amount of resources. And from the private sector, it's less than 2% of this 46 billion, less than 1 billion, less than 2%. It's less money that GCF has given to adaptation in 2021. Last year, we have allocated $3 billion, half were for adaptation. So we have a gigantic gap in terms of adaptation, and notably, we have no finance coming from the private sector for adaptation. And at COP26, there was a recognition that this could not continue. Therefore, there was a commitment to double the finance under the UNFCCC to adaptation, and there were also a number of pledges made by the private sector. And one of our priorities in GCF in the coming years, thanks to the contributions of Japan, which is actually, when you take from the beginning, our largest financial contributor. And thank you to the taxpayer of Japan. That's the second largest right now, but if you take from day one, that's the largest now. Thanks to this contribution, we hope to be able to come with new projects to catalyze adaptation finance. There was a third gap going to Glasgow, which was the overall financing. And here I've mentioned it during my presentation. In Copenhagen at COP15, there was a commitment to mobilize $100 billion from the north to the south. to help developing countries in addressing climate change, in realizing their climate ambition. We did not reach, and this was $100 billion by 2020. We did not reach it. We were at $79 billion. And most of this money is in the tied form. For example, Japanese assistance to GCF is untied. And the fact that it's tied is a problem because you cannot use it in the most flexible manner to mobilize other money. And so we desperately need this $100 billion in a flexible form to catalyze the $3 trillion by 2030, the $6 trillion by 2050. And there was, in Glasgow, there was a recognition about it. And there was a decision to come with a roadmap to meet the $100 billion and go above. And a lot of trust fund managers also made the decision to incorporate climate into their investment decision making. So if we get the 100 billion, we might be able to catalyze 3 trillion if the asset managers are on board. And so these were major progress, and we have avoided the creation of a fourth gap. The fourth gap would have been trust. We could have gone to COP27 with total distrust between the South and the North, because the North will not have met the $100 billion promise, and it's part of the compact, but also between the North and the South on one side and the multilateral system, because the multilateral system would have failed to be able to bring everybody together. And there we would have gone toward a lot of bilateral initiatives, taxes, etc. And so in Glasgow, we avoided the fourth gap. Our collective challenge for COP27 is to make sure that we still avoid the fourth gap and we make dramatic improvement regarding the first three gaps.
Thank you very much, Dr. Glemarec. So the next I'd like to give a floor, Ambassador Akahori. Floor is yours.
Thank you. I'd like to respond briefly to all the three questions. On the first question, we see a human security crisis on this issue. And UNDP has issued a new human security report, and Japan has been involved in that process. We are happy that the report is there, but we see a human security crisis. But it's also an opportunity for multi-stakeholder actors to act together, including the private finance sector. So we look forward to development in that area. I'd like to join Dr. Glemarec in stressing the importance of adaptation. But of course, we should not forget mitigation, because if some large emitters continue increasing their emissions up until 2030, even though Japan and others make efforts to reduce by 46 or 50% by 2030, it's the wrong trend. So our Prime Minister has said it's the critical decade leading up to 2030. Let us all work together, and Japan will continue working on what I call the G20 minus G7. So those countries in the G20 who have not the same level of commitment as the G7 countries. On the second question, certainly, we need to strengthen policy making and implementing capacities in implementing countries. One example of Japanese initiative is the Pacific Climate Change Center, where we assist the training of people responsible for policymaking and implementation in island states. On the third question, yes, thank you for reminding us of the importance of trust. Because what Japan is good at, hopefully, I hope, is trust. We do not preach what we do not practice. Sometimes we are very, let's say, reluctant to commit because we are not sure that we can commit to live up to that commitment. But once we commit, we live up to it. So, and we also, again, to go back to the first question, we do believe in human security, not leaving anyone behind, and taking a human-central approach. And also, with our implementing partners, we also always stress the importance of partnership and the respect for their ownership. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So the next, Mr. Kondo, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I focus on the question 1 and 2, the one about the challenges and then opportunities for implementing the Paris Agreement. You know, we are heading to the end of August, when the TICAD 8 conference will be held in Tunisia. TICAD is a Tokyo International Conference for African Development. And there, the part of the principal issue of the discussion is the climate change, of course. You know, the Paris Agreement was well done to get a commitment from the developing countries. But there is a conditionality. We need adequate financial, technical, capacity development support. To do that, Japan's contribution through UNDP to make it happen by the project adjusted climate promise. It's very important. Each country has their own commitment. Egypt, they need to shift into the solar power generation. At least 20% should be, now 20%. By 2035, 42% should be alternative energy. So to implement this national target, they need a capacity. We are working on that. And also, the capacity issue, that is also important. We engaged University of Oxford, and then we did the survey, the people climate voting. And then we collected 22,000 voting result from survey, and we found out 79%, 80% of the people are very, very anxious and worried about the implication of the climate change. That is very similar result to our human security report that we just issued that shows among 7 people, at least 6 people are having a strong anxiety, whatever the development stage, whatever the rich or poor. So that is the situation of the planet or human being is now in a huge insecurity. So major reasons, one of the major reasons is that climate change. We have to educate young people and then help researchers develop this doctrine and then make it into the implementation of proper education with the help of UNU. I'm sorry, I said nationally determined commitment, nationally determined contribution. Sorry, thank you.
Thank you very much. So the next panelist is Professor Yamaguchi. Floor is yours.
And thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. And in fact, I had listed the many gaps and opportunities, but since the expert had already identified many important gaps, so I would like just to supplement 2 potential the challenges I can find. Actually, I had worked for the Tokyo Institute of Technology, that's a science and technology university, for the last 23 years. So I know how the scientists, engineer, how they think. From my experience, that carbon neutrality cannot be achieved only with the investment in low carbon technologies. So it is not the question of the technology only, and I think it will require the deep transformation of the economic and social system, which has to be just and inclusive, as the UNDP already mentions, in the context of leave no one behind. So in this regard, it is essential to enhance the different tools and support, including training and education at all levels, effective governance, and multi-stakeholders, the partnership. And as we all know, that no single government or no one institution alone can make such a massive contribution to achieve the both commitment of the Paris Agreement and SDG, the goals. Therefore, definitely collective action is needed among the multi-stakeholders. So just yesterday, actually, United Nations University organized the UN and high-level political forum side event on strengthening synergies between climate action and SDGs. And we had mobilized experts from academia, international organizations, civil societies to discuss these important questions. And this is something we shall continue to take place to open up the dialogue so that we can really mobilize so many different areas of expertise. Another gap from our experience is I'd like to highlight is and according to a report by the UNFCCC Secretariat, there is notable issues in institutional capacity to sustain and improve the measuring, reporting, and validating so-called MRV, the system. And in fact, quite a number of national reports from developing countries were prepared on ad hoc basis and did not result in a solid and permanent process, according to the UNFCCC. Therefore, there is a very strong need to establish a national-based or a nationally owned and permanent framework to produce the solid national report in a sustainable and timely manner. And along with this, a dynamic training plan for the technical expert is vital, particularly those who are involved in those reporting, the system. Okay. And I don't want to end my presentation with the negative tone. So the positive opportunity will be that we participated at the COP26 last year in Glasgow, and we have recognized, I have seen the increased recognition that education can play an essential role promoting this meaningful social transformation that is needed to deliver the Paris Agreement and achieve the SDG at the same time. So the participant also reaffirmed the importance of empowering the youth for the climate action. So this is something the United Nations University would like to continue to make our endeavors. So I have just mentioned about the Paris Agreement specialization for the post-degree program in my presentation, but specifically I'd like to mention that our curriculum will include coursework for this specialization, very specific subject, such as a carbon market mechanism, integrated assessment model on climate change, and national net zero emission adaptation planning, and transparency system. So we will also focus on the very practical approaches. So we may offer the non-thesis options, the concentrating more of the practicum types of the learning and the teaching. Okay, so and I hope we can really collaborate among the different institutions, including your institution, Japanese government definitely, and UNDP, for creating the curriculum, also the implementing this curriculum. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. So yes, thank you very much, all panelists, for exciting discussion. Yeah, really, I want to continue listening to your very interesting discussion, but however, the time has passed. So I'd like to close today's event. So finally, I'd like to everyone to give a big hand to panelists. Thank you very much.